It was a chilly October night when I first moved into the old Victorian house at the edge of Ashwood, a small town with more rumors than residents. The house was a fixer-upper, the kind of place you get dirt cheap if you didn't mind peeling wallpaper, creaking floorboards, and a history whispered about in hushed voices. The locals said it was cursed, but I wasn't superstitious. Or so I thought. The first few days were uneventful, apart from the occasional odd creak or bang I attributed to the house settling. But then the dreams began. They weren't nightmares exactly, but off. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, unable to remember what had terrified me. Shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should, and sometimes I swore I heard faint laughter when I was alone. One evening, as I unpacked, I found an old leather-bound book wedged in the back of the attic. Its cover was unmarked, the leather dry and cracked. Inside, the pages were filled with handwritten stories, scary stories, each one more disturbing than the last. They weren't ordinary ghost tales. These stories felt personal, like they had been lived by the writer. I couldn't stop reading, even though the air around me felt heavier with every page I turned. One story in particular got under my skin. It was about a man who moved into a house just like mine, only to be haunted by a shadowy figure he couldn't escape. As I read the last line, and when he turned around, he saw his own face staring back at him, grinning. A chill ran down my spine. That's when the knocking started. It was soft at first, coming from inside the walls. I told myself it was mice, or maybe the pipes. But as the days passed, the knocks grew louder and more deliberate. They moved, too. First in the kitchen, then the living room, and finally my bedroom. One night, the knocking stopped. I should have felt relief, but instead, dread settled over me. It was too quiet. That's when I heard the whispering. It started as a faint hum, barely audible, but the more I strained to hear it, the clearer it became. A woman's voice, soft and sorrowful, repeating the same phrase over and over. Why did you open it? I searched the house, clutching a flashlight and a kitchen knife. Every corner, every closet, every shadowed alcove, I checked them all. Nothing. I was alone. But when I returned to my bedroom, the book was open on the floor, even though I had locked it in the attic. My hands trembled as I picked it up, and I nearly screamed when I saw my name scrawled in fresh ink at the top of a blank page. Beneath it, a new story began to write itself, letter by letter. The story was about me. It described how I moved into the house, found the book, and started hearing voices. Every detail was accurate, and then it described what would happen next. The whispers would grow louder, it said, until they turned into screams. The knocking would become banging, shaking the very walls. And then one night I would see her, the woman who had written the book. That night came sooner than I expected. I awoke to the sound of banging so violent it felt like the house was being torn apart. The whispers were deafening, layered voices screaming the same phrase. Why did you open it? Why did you open it? I stumbled out of bed, the floorboards icy beneath my feet. The air was thick, oppressive, and I felt like I was being watched. That's when I saw her. She was standing in the corner of my room, barely more than a shadow, her face obscured by a veil of tangled black hair. But her eyes, I'll never forget them. They were wide, unblinking, and filled with a rage so intense it felt like it could burn through me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. She stepped closer, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. Her mouth opened, impossibly wide, and the screaming voices poured out of her. Why did you open it? I don't remember how I got out of the house. The next thing I knew, I was running barefoot down the street, the cold night air stinging my skin. I didn't stop until I reached the diner on Main Street, where the few night owls gave me strange looks as I stumbled in, babbling about ghosts and haunted books. I stayed at a motel that night, too scared to go back. The next morning, I returned with a locksmith and the town's sheriff. The house was silent. The book was gone. The locksmith found scratches on the inside of the front door, deep and jagged, like someone or something had been trying to claw its way out. The sheriff told me to sell the place and never look back. I did just that. I packed what little I could and left Ashwood for good. But sometimes late at night I hear it again, the whispering. And when I do, I can't help but wonder, who's reading the book now?
Story number 2.
I never believed in ghosts. Growing up in a small Appalachian town, I heard plenty of stories about haunted forests, cursed relics, and restless spirits. But they were always just that, stories. That changed the night I stayed in the Hollow Creek Motel. I was driving through Tennessee on my way to visit family when the storm hit. Sheets of rain pounded the windshield, turning the road into a blur of black and gray. The wipers couldn't keep up, and after nearly sliding off the road twice, I decided to stop for the night. The motel appeared out of nowhere, a dimly lit sign flashing vacancy in neon red. It looked old, the kind of place where the wallpaper peels and the sheets smell faintly of mildew, but I didn't care. I just needed a place to sleep. The man at the front desk barely looked up as I checked in. He was pale, with watery eyes that darted nervously around the room. His voice was a hoarse whisper when he handed me the key. "Room 6, he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "Don't open the window." I raised an eyebrow but didn't ask. It seemed like a strange request, but I was too tired to care. The room was exactly what I expected, small, dingy, and damp. The bed creaked when I sat on it, and the TV only picked up static. The storm raged outside, thunder rattling the walls, but I felt safe enough inside, at least at first. I had just started to doze off when I heard it, a soft tapping at the window. At first, I thought it was the rain, but the pattern was too deliberate. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 3 more. My heart started to race as I remembered the man's warning. "Don't open the window." I told myself it was just the storm, maybe a branch blown against the glass. I rolled over, pulling the covers up to my chin, and tried to ignore it. But the tapping didn't stop. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. I couldn't take it anymore. Slowly, I sat up and turned toward the window. The thin curtains fluttered slightly in the draft, and for a moment I thought I saw a shadow move behind them. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. The tapping stopped. I stared at the window, waiting for something to happen. Seconds ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. Just when I started to relax, a voice whispered from the other side of the glass. "Let me in." I froze. The voice was soft, almost childlike, but there was something wrong about it, something that made my stomach twist into knots. "Go away," I shouted, my voice cracking. The whisper came again, more insistent this time. "Let me in, please." I grabbed the lamp from the bedside table and held it like a weapon as I approached the window. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold on to it. "Who's there?" I demanded. The voice didn't answer, but the shadow behind the curtain grew darker, larger. My breath caught in my throat as a pale hand pressed against the glass, the fingers long and thin, almost skeletal. "Let me in." I stumbled back, dropping the lamp. The bulb shattered, plunging the room into darkness. Panic surged through me as I scrambled for the door, fumbling with the lock. The tapping started again, faster this time, louder. Bang, bang, bang. The door finally gave way, and I burst into the hallway, nearly colliding with the man from the front desk. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the cracked walls. His face went pale, and he grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the lobby. "You opened the window, didn't you?" "No," I cried. "But something was out there. Someone was tapping." He shook his head, his grip tightening. "You didn't open it. That's good. That's real good. Whatever you do, don't go back in there." He wouldn't explain further, just muttered something about the one who knocks, and pushed me toward the parking lot. I didn't argue. I jumped into my car and sped off, the storm be damned. I drove until the rain stopped and the sun started to rise, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. When I finally stopped at a diner to catch my breath, I realized I still had the key to room 6 in my pocket. For a moment, I considered going back, returning it to the strange man at the desk. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The key was scratched, deep gouges running across its surface, as if someone or something had tried to claw it out of my hand. I threw it into the trash and drove straight home, swearing never to speak of the Hollow Creek Motel again. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps, and a whisper that chills me to the bone. "Let me in."
Story number 3.
It started with a letter. I found it in my mailbox one crisp November morning, tucked between a stack of bills and a flyer for a pizza place. It was handwritten, addressed to me in shaky, uneven letters. There was no return address. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tore it open right there on the sidewalk. Inside was a single sheet of paper, its edges yellowed and brittle. The note was brief but chilling. "Don't look at her." I stared at the words, feeling a strange unease creep over me. There was no explanation, no signature, just those 4 words scrawled in thick black ink. I looked around, half expecting to see someone watching me, but the street was empty. Shrugging it off as a prank, I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the trash. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt a strange heaviness, as if someone were standing at the foot of my bed, watching. The room was silent, but the silence felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. Around 3 a.m., I heard the first knock. It was faint, almost hesitant, but it made my heart leap. I sat up in bed, listening. Another knock, louder this time, echoed through the house. It was coming from my front door. I hesitated, my mind racing. Who would be knocking at this hour? Pulling on a sweatshirt, I crept downstairs. The hallway was dark, and the air felt colder than it should have. As I reached the door, I hesitated, a strange voice in the back of my mind whispering, "Don't open it," but I couldn't ignore it. I peeked through the peephole, expecting to see an empty porch. Instead, I saw her. A woman stood on my doorstep, her head bowed so her face was hidden beneath a curtain of tangled black hair. She was barefoot, her white dress soaked and clinging to her thin frame. Her arms hung limply at her sides, and she didn't move. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. "Can I help you?" I called through the door, my voice shaking. She didn't respond. "Miss, are you okay?" Still nothing. The warning from the letter echoed in my mind. Don't look at her. My stomach twisted as I realized I already had. I stepped away from the door, my heart hammering in my chest. That's when she knocked again, harder this time, the sound reverberating through the house. "Go away," I shouted, backing into the living room. The knocking stopped. For a moment, I thought she was gone, but then I heard it, the soft creak of footsteps on the porch. They moved slowly, deliberately, circling the house. I ran to the window and yanked the curtains closed, my hands trembling. Then she knocked on the window. I screamed, stumbling back. The knock came again, steady and rhythmic, as if she knew I was there. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my fingers fumbling over the buttons. The operator answered, her calm voice a lifeline. "Someone's trying to get into my house," I blurted, my words tumbling over each other. "She's outside. She's knocking on my windows." "What's your address, ma'am?" the operator asked. I gave it to her, trying to keep my voice steady. "An officer is on the way. Stay on the line." The knocking stopped. I held my breath, listening. The house was eerily silent again, but the silence felt worse now, heavier, like something was lurking just out of sight. "Ma'am?" the operator said. "Are you still there?" "Yes," I whispered. She stopped knocking. "Good. Stay inside. Don't open any doors or windows." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. My eyes darted around the room, searching for something, anything, I could use as a weapon. I grabbed a fire poker from the hearth and clutched it tightly. Then I heard it. A soft, shuffling sound. It was coming from inside the house. My blood ran cold. I turned slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The sound was coming from the hallway, just out of view. "Ma'am?" the operator said again. "What's happening?" "She's inside," I whispered, barely able to form the words. The shuffling grew louder, closer. My grip on the fire poker tightened as I backed into the corner of the room, my eyes fixed on the doorway. And then she appeared. She stepped into the room, her movements slow and unnatural, like a puppet on strings. Her head was still bowed, her hair hiding her face, but I could feel her eyes on me, burning into me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "Don't look." The operator's voice crackled through the phone. The woman raised her head. I don't know what I saw. It was too much, too wrong for my mind to process. Her face twisted and shifted, features melting and reforming like something out of a nightmare. Her mouth stretched open, impossibly wide, and a sound like static and screams filled the room. I dropped the phone and ran, my body moving on pure instinct. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The police arrived moments later, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness. They searched the house but found no sign of the woman. The front door was locked and the windows were all latched from the inside. "Are you sure someone was in here?" one of the officers asked, his tone skeptical. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I left that night, staying with a friend until I could find a new place to live. I tried to move on, to forget, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still watching me. And then the letters started again. Each one was the same. Don't look at her.
Story number 4.
It all started with the sound of a child's laughter. I was staying at my sister's house in rural Wisconsin, helping her recover from surgery. Her house was old, the kind of place with creaky stairs and drafty windows, nestled at the edge of a dense forest. It was charming during the day, but unsettling at night. It was my third evening there when I first heard it. I was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book, when the sound stopped me cold, faint, high-pitched giggling coming from outside. I froze, my eyes darting to the window. The yard was dark, illuminated only by the dim porch light, and the trees beyond loomed like shadowy sentinels. It was late, well past midnight, and there were no children living nearby. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe an animal. Raccoons made strange noises, didn't they? Shaking my head, I went back to my book, determined to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping over me. But then it came again. Closer this time. Laughter. I put the book down and crept to the window, peeking out through the curtain. The yard was empty. The forest edge was still, the bare branches swaying slightly in the breeze. And then I saw it. A shadow darted between the trees. Too small to be an adult, but too quick to be a child. My stomach clenched, and I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding. "What are you doing up?" My sister's voice startled me. I spun around to see her standing in the doorway, clutching a blanket around her shoulders. Her face was pale, her eyes tired. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "Hear what?" "Laughter, from outside." Her expression darkened, and for a moment I thought I saw fear flicker across her face. She shook her head. "You're imagining things. This place is old. It plays tricks on you." I didn't believe her, but I didn't press the issue. She had enough to worry about without me adding ghost stories to the mix. The next day passed uneventfully, but the moment night fell, the laughter returned. This time it wasn't just outside. It started in the hallway while I was brushing my teeth. A soft, giggling sound like a child playing hide-and-seek. I whipped around, toothpaste foaming at the corners of my mouth, but the hallway was empty. I rinsed my mouth, trying to steady my breathing. "Just your imagination," I muttered, but my voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. The giggling grew louder as the night wore on, moving through the house. It echoed from the kitchen, the living room, the stairs. My sister swore she didn't hear it. "You're tired," she said, her voice firm. "Go to bed." But I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the giggling looping endlessly in my mind. Just when I thought I'd finally drift off, I heard something new. The sound of small footsteps in the hallway. I bolted upright, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaking. The doorknob rattled. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Seconds stretched into minutes, the silence so heavy I thought I might scream. And then slowly, the door creaked open. The hallway was pitch black, but I could feel it. Something standing there, just beyond the threshold. A faint giggle broke the silence, and I saw movement, something low to the ground, crawling toward me. I scrambled out of bed and slammed the door shut, pressing my weight against it. "Stay out!" I shouted, though I wasn't sure who or what I was talking to. The giggling stopped. For the rest of the night, I sat on the floor, my back against the door, the fire poker from the fireplace clutched tightly in my hands. The house was silent, but I could feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. In the morning, I told my sister everything. She didn't laugh. Instead, she sat down at the kitchen table, her hands trembling as she lit a cigarette. "I didn't want to scare you," she said finally, exhaling a shaky plume of smoke. "But you're not the first one to hear it." "What do you mean?" She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the forest outside the window. "Before I bought this place, the last family that lived here had a little girl. She used to play in the woods all the time. One day, she went out and never came back. They searched for weeks, but they never found her. After that, strange things started happening. Footsteps, laughter, doors opening on their own. The family moved out. I thought it was just a story, until now." My stomach dropped. "And you didn't think to tell me this earlier?" I snapped. "I didn't think it was real," she shot back. "I've never heard anything myself, but I don't go outside after dark." Her words sent a chill down my spine. That night, the giggling started again, louder and more persistent. This time, my sister heard it too. We sat in the living room, every light in the house turned on, clutching kitchen knives like they could protect us. The laughter moved through the house, circling us, taunting us, and then the front door creaked open. We both froze, staring at the dark rectangle of the doorway. A small figure stood there, silhouetted against the night. It was a little girl, her dress tattered, her hair hanging limp and wet around her face. "Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice high and sweet. Neither of us could answer. Her head tilted to the side, and she stepped inside, her bare feet leaving muddy footprints on the floor. "I want to play," she said, her voice breaking into a giggle. We ran. I don't remember how we got to the car or how we managed to drive away. All I know is that when we looked back, the girl was standing at the edge of the forest, her head tilted, her hand raised in a slow wave. We never went back to that house. My sister sold it as soon as she could, and we both moved far away. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it again. A giggle. And I know she's still waiting.
Story number 5.
I don't know if I'll make it through the night, but if you're hearing this, maybe it'll serve as a warning. It started 3 nights ago when I downloaded the wrong app. I'm not tech savvy, but I like trying new things. A friend told me about a niche horror game that had been circulating online. It's terrifying, he said, grinning as he showed me screenshots of dark corridors and creepy, glowing eyes. But be careful, it feels too real. He sent me the link, and like an idiot, I downloaded it without thinking twice. The app was called Watch Me. Its icon was a single bloodshot eye. When I opened it, the screen displayed only 2 options: play and quit. I chose play. The game started simply. It showed me my own phone's camera feed and asked me to walk around my apartment. The interface overlaid creepy static effects, and the screen flickered occasionally, making me feel like I was in a found-footage horror movie. Cool, I muttered, exploring my dimly lit living room through the screen. Then the first prompt appeared. Don't turn around. I froze, staring at the screen. The camera feed showed my reflection in the dark TV screen across the room. Behind me was nothing. I laughed nervously and followed the game's instructions. A second prompt appeared. Walk to your bedroom. I followed the instructions again, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the quiet apartment. Look under the bed. This was when I started to feel uneasy. But it was just a game, right? I got on my knees, lifting the edge of the blanket, my phone's camera aimed under the bed. Empty. Except the screen flickered, and for half a second I saw something, a pale face, wide eyes staring directly at me. I dropped the phone, my heart pounding. When I picked it up again, the app had frozen, the bloodshot eye icon staring back at me. I deleted it immediately, thinking that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The next night, I heard noises in the apartment. Soft tapping sounds, like fingernails drumming against the walls. I checked every room, but nothing was out of place. My nerves were already frayed when I got a notification on my phone. Why did you stop playing? It was from the app I deleted. The icon was back on my screen. I opened it against my better judgment. The same camera feed appeared, showing me sitting on my couch, looking terrified. A new prompt flashed on the screen. You shouldn't have turned it off. The tapping sounds grew louder, coming from the hallway. I ran to the front door, throwing it open to check the hallway outside my apartment. It was empty, just the dim overhead lights casting long shadows. When I turned back, the door slammed shut behind me. My phone vibrated in my hand. Let us in. My hands trembled as I opened the door. The living room was dark, though I was sure I had left the lights on. The app's camera feed flickered, showing brief glimpses of something moving in the shadows. Something tall and thin with unnaturally long arms. The phone screen went black, and so did the room. I don't remember how long I sat there in the dark, clutching my phone, too afraid to move. The lights eventually came back on, and everything seemed normal again. But the app was still on my phone, and no matter how many times I tried to delete it, it reappeared within minutes. Last night, the game took it a step further. The phone buzzed while I was brushing my teeth, and when I looked at the screen, the camera feed was already active. It showed me in the bathroom, but the reflection in the mirror wasn't mine. It was her. A woman stood in my place, her head tilted at a natural angle, her eyes wide and unblinking. Her mouth stretched into a grin that didn't belong on any human face. The prompt appeared again. She's here now. I screamed, dropping the phone. My reflection was back to normal when I looked in the mirror. But I wasn't alone anymore. Everywhere I went, I felt her presence. The faint sound of breathing behind me, a cold touch on my arm when I was alone, shadows that didn't match the room. Tonight, the game has stopped pretending. The latest prompt appeared an hour ago. Let her in, or she'll let herself in. I've barricaded the doors and windows, but I know it's useless. The tapping has started again, louder and more insistent. It's not coming from outside this time. It's inside, moving from room to room, getting closer. I can hear her breathing just outside the bedroom door now. The app vibrated one last time. The message simply says, look behind you.
Story number 6.
I didn't mean to buy a haunted painting. It happened at a small estate sale in a quiet Midwestern town. I'd gone with a friend who was into antique furniture, and while she haggled over a desk, I wandered into a dusty back room. That's where I saw it, a painting propped against the wall, almost hidden behind a stack of books. It was striking. A woman in an old-fashioned black dress standing on a lonely dirt road. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. Her eyes, though, were the most unnerving part, large, dark, and piercing, as if she were staring directly at me. I couldn't look away. How much for this? I asked the seller. The man hesitated, his gaze flicking to the painting and then back to me. You sure you want that? He asked. Came with the house. Nobody's ever wanted it. I shrugged. I like it. How much? He sighed. $10. A steal. I hung the painting in my apartment that night, above the fireplace in the living room. It gave the space a moody, vintage vibe, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it somehow made the room more alive. That first night, I didn't notice anything strange. The second night, I did. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate steps moving across the hardwood floor of my living room. My heart raced as I lay in bed, straining to listen. Thud! Thud! I grabbed my phone and crept to the bedroom door, easing it open. The apartment was dark and still. I stepped into the hallway, my feet silent against the carpet. The footsteps stopped. The living room was empty, bathed in faint light from the street lamp outside. I stared at the painting. The woman's eyes seemed even darker than before, and for a moment I thought her head had turned slightly to the side. I shook the thought away and went back to bed, telling myself it was just my imagination. The third night, I couldn't ignore it. I came home late from work and found the painting tilted at an odd angle. I hadn't touched it since I hung it up, and it wasn't like anyone else had been in my apartment. Frowning, I straightened it and stepped back to admire my handiwork. That's when I noticed it. The woman's eyes were looking to the right. In the painting, she'd always been staring straight ahead, directly at the viewer. But now her gaze had shifted. She was looking down the road, towards something I couldn't see. I blinked, my stomach tightening. No way. I must have been imagining it. I went to bed early, hoping sleep would erase the unease gnawing at my chest, but I couldn't escape her. I dreamed of the painting that night. In the dream, I was standing on the dirt road with her, the wind whipping around us. She wasn't still anymore. She was walking, her footsteps crunching on the gravel. Wait, I called after her. She stopped and turned to me, her dark eyes locking onto mine. Don't follow me, she said, her voice low and cold. Don't let it see you. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. The next day, I tried to get rid of the painting. I took it off the wall, stuffed it into a trash bag, and drove it to the nearest dump. When I came home, I felt a strange sense of relief. The apartment seemed lighter, less oppressive, until I saw it. The painting was back, hanging in its usual spot above the fireplace. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the couch, staring at it in disbelief. Her gaze had shifted again, further down the road. She wasn't alone anymore. A figure stood in the distance, barely visible, a tall, shadowy silhouette with long, spindly limbs. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my trance. It was a text from my friend. Hey, did you leave early from work? Thought I saw you on the road, but it looked like you were with someone. My blood ran cold. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and dread. The painting changed every time I looked at it. The shadowy figure grew closer, its shape becoming more defined. I couldn't make out its face, if it had one, but its presence filled me with a deep, primal fear. The footsteps in my apartment grew louder at night. Sometimes I'd hear whispers, soft and indistinct, as if a conversation were taking place just out of earshot. On the 7th night, I decided I couldn't stay in the apartment anymore. I packed a bag, planning to crash at a friend's place until I figured out what to do. But as I was leaving, the painting stopped me. The woman wasn't in it anymore. Neither was the shadowy figure. The dirt road stretched out, empty and desolate, disappearing into the darkness. A chill ran down my spine, and I turned to leave. That's when I heard it, a voice, low and raspy, coming from directly behind me. Don't look. I froze, my breath hitching. Don't turn around, the voice said again, closer this time. I clutched my bag and bolted out the door, not daring to look back. I've been staying at my friend's house for 2 days now, but I can't escape it. The footsteps followed me here. The whispers creep into my dreams. This morning, I woke up to find the painting leaning against the wall in my room. The woman is back in the painting. She's staring straight ahead again, but her eyes are filled with something new, something almost like pity. Behind her, the shadowy figure is closer than ever. I don't know what's going to happen tonight, but if you ever see a painting like this one, do yourself a favor. Don't take it home.
Story number 7.
I always hated the house at the end of the street. It was the only one that hadn't been renovated, its paint peeling and windows perpetually dark. Kids whispered about it, daring each other to knock on the door, but no one ever did. Adults avoided talking about it entirely. So when I found out my cousin Matt had rented the place, I thought he was insane. Cheap rent, he said with a shrug when I confronted him. Besides, it's just a house. Stories don't scare me. Matt had always been cocky, but even he seemed uneasy when I came to visit him 2 weeks later. The house felt wrong from the moment I stepped inside. The air was heavy, stale, and the dim lighting only made the cracked walls and warped floors more oppressive. "Have you been sleeping here?" I asked, noticing the bags under Matt's eyes. "Not well," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "Weird dreams." I didn't press him, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. That night, I stayed over to keep him company. We were playing video games in the living room when the first noise came, a faint scratching like nails on wood. Matt paused the game, his head snapping toward the hallway. "What was that?" I whispered. "Probably just a rat," he said, but his voice wavered. The scratching grew louder, moving toward us. I grabbed my phone, turning on the flashlight, and pointed it down the hallway. "Nothing." Matt laughed nervously. "See? Nothing there." But as soon as he said it, the door to the basement creaked open. "Nope," said standing. "Nope, nope, nope." "Relax," Matt said, but he didn't sound convincing. "It's probably the wind. Wind doesn't open doors." Despite my protests, Matt grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the basement. "Stay here," he said. "Like hell I'm staying here alone." I followed him, my heart pounding. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones. The light from our flashlights barely cut through the darkness, and every shadow seemed to move. "See?" Matt said, his voice echoing. "Nothing down here." But then the scratching started again, louder and more frantic, coming from the far corner of the room. "Let's go," I said, grabbing his arm. He shook me off, shining his flashlight toward the noise. The beam landed on an old wooden door I hadn't noticed before, its surface splintered and warped. "That's not supposed to be here," Matt muttered. "What do you mean?" "This wasn't here when I moved in." I didn't like the way his voice cracked. Before I could stop him, Matt stepped closer, his hand reaching for the rusted doorknob. "Don't," I said, panic rising in my chest. He ignored me, pulling the door open with a groan of protest. Behind it was a narrow staircase spiraling downward into pitch blackness. "Hell no," I said, stepping back, but Matt was already descending, his flashlight bobbing with each step. "Matt, stop!" I hissed, but he didn't listen. The farther he went, the fainter his light became until it vanished entirely. "Matt?" I called, my voice trembling. Silence. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I followed him. The stairs creaked under my weight, the air growing colder with each step. "Matt?" I whispered again. At the bottom, I found myself in a cavernous space, the walls damp and lined with strange symbols carved into the stone. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced across the room. "Matt?" I called, louder this time. Then I saw him, standing in the center of the room, his back to me. "Matt, what are you doing?" He didn't respond. As I stepped closer, I realized he was whispering something under his breath, his voice a low, guttural chant. "Matt!" I grabbed his shoulder, spinning him around. His face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. His mouth moved, but the words he spoke didn't sound like anything human. "Snap out of it!" I shouted, shaking him. The room suddenly felt alive, the symbols on the walls glowing faintly. A low rumbling filled the air, and the ground beneath us trembled. "Matt, we have to go!" Finally, his eyes flicked to mine, and the chanting stopped. "What? Where am I?" he stammered. "No time. Let's move." We bolted up the stairs, the rumbling growing louder behind us. The symbols burned brighter, casting the basement in an otherworldly light. When we reached the top, I slammed the basement door shut, and we collapsed against it, gasping for breath. "What the hell was that?" Matt whispered. "I don't know, but you're moving out tomorrow." He didn't argue. That night, we barricaded ourselves in his bedroom, but the house wouldn't let us rest. The scratching returned, thus louder and angrier, coming from all around us. Whispers filled the air, incomprehensible but full of malice. At one point, the lights flickered, and the shadows in the corners seemed to stretch toward us. We didn't sleep. By morning, Matt packed up whatever he could fit in his car and left. I followed him, leaving my car behind, too afraid to stay a second longer. A week later, the house burned to the ground. The official report said it was an accident, faulty wiring or something, but I knew better. I never asked Matt about what he saw in the basement. He wouldn't have told me if I had. But sometimes, late at night, I hear scratching at my window, and I wonder if we really left it behind.
Story number 8.
I shouldn't have answered the phone that night. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was home alone, binge-watching a show on the couch. My roommate was out of town, and the house was unnervingly quiet except for the hum of the TV. That's when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello." At first, there was nothing but static. I was about to hang up when a voice cut through, low and distorted. "Do you see it? Excuse me?" I said, sitting up straighter. "The man in the corner," the voice said. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced toward the darkened corner of the living room, but there was nothing there. "Very funny," I said, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. "Who is this?" The line went dead. I shook it off as a prank call and went back to my show, but the uneasiness lingered. I couldn't help glancing at the corner every few minutes, half expecting to see someone standing there. I didn't. Not yet. An hour later, the phone rang again. This time, I hesitated before answering. "Hello?" Static, followed by the same distorted voice. "He's closer now." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Who is this? What do you want?" I demanded. The voice didn't answer, but I heard a faint noise in the background, like soft, shuffling footsteps. Then the line went dead again. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking each one. My heart pounded as I moved through the house, flipping on every light. Still, nothing. I tried to convince myself it was just someone messing with me, maybe a bored teenager, or even a friend trying to scare me. But then my phone buzzed. It wasn't a call this time, it was a text. "Turn around." I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My hands trembled as I slowly turned to look behind me. The room was empty, but the corner seemed darker than before, like the shadows were thicker, heavier. I backed into the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the drawer, my phone clutched tightly in my other hand. Then came another text. "You shouldn't have looked." I ran to my bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the knife. The phone buzzed again. "He's at the door." A soft knock echoed through the house, followed by a long, agonizing creak. "No," I whispered, backing away from the door. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. I dialed 911, my fingers fumbling on the screen. The operator picked up, but before I could speak, the call cut off with a sharp burst of static. The knocking stopped. I stared at the door, my pulse racing. Minutes passed, and the silence became unbearable. Finally, I crept toward the door and pressed my ear against it, straining to hear anything. The phone buzzed again. "You let him in." My stomach dropped. The lights flickered, plunging the room into brief darkness. When they came back on, I saw it. Something was standing in the corner. It wasn't human. Its figure was tall and impossibly thin, its arms too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its face, or what should have been a face, was featureless, a blank canvas of pale, stretched skin. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze, heavy and cold, pinning me in place. The lights flickered again, and it was closer. I screamed, throwing the knife at it. The blade passed through the figure as if it were made of smoke, clattering uselessly to the floor. The lights went out completely. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark, clutching my phone, too terrified to move. When the lights finally came back on, the figure was gone. But the corner wasn't empty. A single message was scrawled on the wall, written in something dark and wet. "He's always watching." I grabbed my keys and ran out of the house, not stopping until I was in my car, speeding away. It's been 3 days since that night, and I haven't gone back. I'm staying at a friend's place, but the calls haven't stopped. Every time I answer, I hear the same distorted voice. "Do you see him?" And every time, the shadows in the corner grow darker.
Story number 9.
I never believed in ghosts or curses until I took the job at Hollow Creek Manor. It was a sprawling estate on the outskirts of town, shrouded in local legend. People claimed it was haunted. By what exactly, no one seemed to agree on. Some said it was the original owner, a reclusive woman named Eliza Hollow. Others whispered about something darker, more malevolent. I didn't care. I needed the money, and the caretaker job paid well. My first day was uneventful. The house was old but solid, its grand halls and towering ceilings speaking of a time when wealth and elegance reigned. My tasks were simple: clean, organize, and keep the place presentable for the occasional tour or event. It wasn't until my second night that things began to feel off. I was in the library, dusting the rows of ancient books, when I heard it. A faint hum, like someone softly singing. I paused, straining to listen, but the sound stopped. "Hello?" I called out, but only silence answered. Shrugging it off as the wind or my imagination, I returned to my work. The humming came back, louder this time, carrying an eerie melody that sent chills down my spine. I followed the sound to the far corner of the library where an old, ornate mirror hung on the wall. Its glass was cloudy, the frame intricately carved with twisting vines and flowers. The humming stopped as I approached. For a moment, I thought I saw something move in the reflection, something that wasn't me. I leaned closer, my breath fogging the glass. A face appeared. It wasn't mine. The woman in the mirror had pale skin, hollow eyes, and dark, tangled hair. Her lips moved soundlessly, but I could feel the weight of her stare, cold and unforgiving. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a chair. When I looked again, the mirror was empty, just my wide-eyed reflection staring back at me. I decided to call it a night. Over the next few days, things escalated. Objects moved on their own, books falling from shelves, chairs shifting across the floor. I'd hear footsteps in the halls when no one else was there, and that haunting hum followed me everywhere. It was the mirror, though, that terrified me most. Every time I walked past it, I felt an overwhelming urge to look, as if something was pulling me toward it. And every time I gave in, I'd see her, Eliza. She was always closer, her hollow eyes fixed on me, her expression twisting from sadness to anger. One night as I lay in bed, I dreamed of the mirror. In the dream, I stood before it, unable to move. Eliza's hands reached out, pressing against the glass. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear. Then the glass shattered, and her hands grabbed my wrists, pulling me in. I woke up screaming, my wrists burning with pain. When I turned on the light, I saw them, red marks like handprints wrapping around my skin. I decided to leave the manor the next day, but the house wouldn't let me go. As I packed my things, the lights flickered, and the air grew heavy. Doors slammed shut, and the humming grew deafening, echoing through every corner of the house. The mirror called to me. I tried to resist, but my legs moved on their own, carrying me to the library. The room was freezing, the air thick with the scent of decay. The mirror gleamed in the dim light, its surface rippling like water. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Eliza appeared, her face filled with rage. This time I could hear her voice, low and venomous. "You took what was mine." "I didn't take anything," I shouted. She pointed the desk in the corner. I followed her gaze and saw a small ornate box I hadn't noticed before. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was a delicate silver necklace, its pendant shaped like a key. The room grew colder, and Eliza's voice echoed around me. "Give it back." I didn't know what she meant, but I grabbed the necklace and ran. The house came alive, its walls groaning, doors slamming, and windows shattering. The humming turned to a deafening wail as I bolted the front door. When I crossed the threshold, everything stopped. I turned back to look at the house. It was silent and still, the windows dark and uninviting. I didn't wait to see if Eliza would follow. I drove straight to the edge of town and tossed the necklace into the river, watching as it sank beneath the surface. Since that night, I haven't returned to Hollow Creek Manor, but sometimes in the quiet hours of the night, I hear that haunting hum, and I wonder if I truly escaped.